Hi everyone, thanks for joining us today. I'm Amelia, I'm the Community Coordinator for Beyond for Early Years. Beyond is a programme of free and funded support for non-profits working with families during the pandemic, during pregnancy to early years, and with organisations that are supporting financial wellbeing or those who are at risk of financial security. We'll be having some more streams coming soon. This session is the fifth one in our training series, so thanks to those that have been attending the kind of whole series, and welcome to those that are just dropping in today. And it's going to be about rapidly testing ways to adapt services in fast changing times. So it's going to be a run on from the last few sessions. A huge thanks to Louise, who is one of the innovation designers at Shift. He'll be hosting us today, and I'm sure she'll kind of introduce herself a bit more. The session's going to run for about an hour. If you've got any questions or any comments, or you want to give us feedback, we really welcome that in the chat. It's really great to hear kind of your reflections and your experiences. If you are writing the chat, make sure you choose all panelists and attendees in the drop-down list so that we can all see what you're telling us about. And if you have any questions, there'll be a chance at the end. So there's a Q&A function. Feel free to drop your Q&As into there, and then I'll pose them to Louise on your behalf at the end of the session. We're going to be recording, but as it's a webinar, you're not going to be visible, so it'll just be Louise and myself that will be visible on the recording. And enjoy. I'll hand over to you, Louise.
Thanks, Amelia. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining this Beyond training that I'm running, which is all about rapidly testing ways to adapt your services in the fast changing times that we're in at the moment. So essentially today's session will be a how-to on making prototypes and running experiments to learn fast, save money, save time. Just FYI, this is my first time ever doing a Zoom webinar training, and I've already got stuck trying to figure out how to move on to my next slide. There we go. Okay, so yeah, please do say hi, tell us who you are, and add some comments in the chat bar throughout. So as Amelia said, we're running off a Zoom webinar, so I'll be able to see some of the comments that come in throughout. So if there's anything that does or doesn't resonate with you that I'm talking about, please do add it in there and keep the conversation going. And then we'll also have time for a Q&A at the end, so definitely keep your questions in there. So my name is Louise Cooper, and I'm an innovation lead at the social design charity Shift. And Shift is focused on helping organisations to play their best roles and work collectively in the fight against systemic social equity issues that impact childhoods, food systems, money, mental health, all among people living on low incomes. And we're really excited to be one of the organisations behind Beyond. So as well as delivering this training, I'm part of the team who has designed the programme and brought it to you, running between October and 2020 and March 2021. So a bit about me while you're introducing yourselves and saying hi in the chat bar. I've spent the last 10 years working as a designer, mostly across digital product and service design. I've worked with a variety of different types of partners, everything from the commercial sector, like working with Vodafone, Zurich Insurance, Tesco's, all the way to more recently over the last 4 or 5 years, working with local councils, housing associations, money and debt advice providers, and the likes. There are two things that I'm obsessed with as a designer. One is understanding people and making things that work for people is the second one. So that's why I'm here with you today, and to tell you basically about that. So I love to prototype. I love to test products and services at early stages to maximize impact, efficiency, and resource. And I'm really looking forward to talking you through all of that in this 1 hour training, with an entire focus on running rapid experiments or tests using prototypes and how that can help your nonprofit learn fast and adapt during times of crisis. Cool. Okay, so let's get stuck in. So I'm going to be really honest and tell you that what I'm trying to do today is a little bit of a convincing job, which is that prototyping and testing can help you adapt your services in a way that saves your organization money, time, and energy. And most importantly, in a way that helps you achieve your intended impact. So every service delivery has an impact that it wants to achieve, and that's what I think prototyping can do in a fast cheap and effective way. So I'm going to start a little bit with the why, and that's my convincing job. That's me trying to convince you. And then I'm going to move a little bit onto the practicalities, which is essentially the kind of the what and how of prototyping, which is essentially me trying to give you a bunch of tips, tricks, and inspiration. As much can be given between now and 1 o'clock. I think it's really important to say, like, why the hell am I even talking about this as part of this training series? And it's because of two things, which is that people's realities are rapidly changing in our current times, and because access to support and service is reduced. Since we started Beyond back in October and have built a community of organisations focused on either early years or financial well-being, some both, we've been hearing the same stories and concerns come up again across the board. We know that we're tight on resources, tight on money, tight on time, tight on emotional energy, and there are big challenges in front of us. And here are the ones that we have heard. Challenges about continuing to deliver services in non-contact remote ways, challenges to keep services and interactions feeling human and to maintain trusts and relationships with service users while shifting things online and actually moving things physically away from people, moving our faces away from people, like we can't see and interact the way we were before. Reaching more people who can benefit from our service. So one of the things with COVID-19 and the crisis that we're in is new cohorts of people who are coming through who might not have previously needed the services that you or we offer, and now they might. And finally, to reach those who are digitally excluded as well. Going non-contact has actually shut a lot of people off who are able to access services who are no longer able to now. And I know there's more than these. I know there has to be many, many more than these. And these are just the kind of obvious, general, top level ones that have come out in our conversation so far. But you know, for you and your service and your organization, what those big challenges are and what those things are that are keeping you up at night at the moment. I want to convince you that prototyping can help you overcome challenges, these challenges that you're facing in your service delivery right now. So where there are ideas for what can be done when you have an idea about how to build a new service, adapt a current service, create an add-on to your service, add an extra channel to your service, prototyping helps you move from that idea to something that exists in the world. I'm going to take a few sips of water as I go. Prototyping, what it does is it helps you make your ideas tangible quickly. So you can work through kinks, gather feedback, and get to impactful solutions after whatever that intended, desired impact is of your service delivery, the reason it exists in the first place, those outcomes that you're looking for. Prototyping can help you achieve those and achieve it in the fastest, most cost-effective, cost-efficient way. Often, and this is what we see in the world, organizations go straight from an idea to building it and executing it and putting it in the world without testing it first. And sometimes that goes wrong. And when it does, you're going to hear me say this over and over again, it costs time, it costs money, it costs energy, it is draining. Let's look at a few examples. Putting things into the world without prototyping first can end up like this, which is funny. Clearly nobody used or sharpened this pencil before deciding to sell it. Or this happy accident. Which way do you go for which one? Or this one. This is why now I go through batteries like there's no tomorrow when I use my mouse. Every day, new products and services are put into the world without prototyping first. At best, these examples can be happy accidents. If you search product fails on Google, you'll see tons of these hashtag product fails. You'll see loads of things like this that have been built and launched without people testing them first. But in reality, these accidents lead to wasted time, wasted money, and most importantly, failure to achieve the intended effect for customers or service users. This is a more serious example. So the NHS COVID-19 app. The idea behind this app was that using Bluetooth on your smartphone, it could trace who you came into contact with And if one of those people had coronavirus symptoms, the app would notify you to self-isolate. Simple idea, beautiful idea, needed idea. On launch of the app, it was realized that the app only recognized 4% of Apple iPhones. That was because the operating system on Apple's iPhone is designed so that apps go to sleep when they're not being used. And when they're asleep, the Bluetooth isn't active. So that meant people had this app on their phone. They thought it was tracing their steps, where they were, who they came in contact with. But because the operating system forced it to go to sleep when it wasn't in use, that meant the Bluetooth wasn't being activated, and therefore the app did not work. This wasted a lot of time and millions of pounds. I've got a question for you, which is, can you think of a time where something was launched into the world without achieving the intended effect? So have a think. This might be something in your organization. It might be something that another organization has done, but have a think, put your answers in the chat bar. There's loads of examples of these. Like I said, searching hashtag product fails just gives you some of the happy accidents, but there are definitely some more costly examples that exist. Okay. The Millennium Dome. So right now we're needing to build and adapt services faster than ever to respond to the crisis. Prototyping and testing your ideas before launching them into the world helps you remove or reduce risk. That's what it does. It helps you save money, save time, save resource. It helps you invest your resources where they will have most impact. What is prototyping exactly? Well, I want to contextualize it within the design thinking approach that you've probably seen come up a few times if you've been to any of the other trainings that make up this 6-part training course. This is the double diamond. It's basically just a visual metaphor that, I guess, breaks down the problem solving stages into 4 parts if you practice design thinking. It's the practice of getting things out into the world to look for clues, evidence, and inspiration by paying attention to things kind of that happen outside of your organization, mainly with your service users and the environments that they exist within. It's the practice of breaking down massive complex problems into smaller chunks. It's the practice of testing your ideas quickly, cheaply, easily to help you decide what you want to run with and what you want to let go of. This is the bit that I'm interested in. And it's a practice of putting real things into the world as early as possible so you can see what does and does not work. You can do this in any order at any time. Each phase of these 4 are powerful alone, and together they can kind of help you detangle and make progress with any big challenge you have, thinking back to the ones that we talked about at the start. I often start at the prototyping bit, that bit that's focused on testing your ideas quickly. That's because you already have ideas about what might work to adapt or improve your services. We all do. Yes, doing like deep discovery research, exploring for clues, doing ethnography, doing open inquiry can tell you things you might not know about your current and or target service users. But the ideas that you have already are informed ideas. You know your people. You have hunches about what's going to work for them and what they need and what might work. You can use prototyping as another kind of research. And this is one thing that I always remind people. People say we need to do research first. We need to go out and talk to a bunch of our service users or people that we want to reach. This prototyping is a type of research. You're just putting something in front of them to help you basically like stimulate what their needs are, what their barriers to your service use are. It's a method to help your ideas in a low risk way. So prototyping, I think, can be a secret weapon in times when the context in the world around us is rapidly changing, and when being adaptable in our services and organization is needed more than ever. So a question for you again. What is an idea that you're thinking about or working on right now that has potential for impact or service improvement? And within your organization or within your service delivery, ideally, what is an idea you're thinking about or currently working on that has potential for impact or service improvement. So write it down, put it in the chat, and keep that in mind. We're going to come back to it later. This can be something, just FYI, brand spanking new, or it can be a change to an existing service, or it can be a new channel or an engagement tactic that you might like to try out. We've covered a bit about the why of prototyping, and now I want to go into a bit about the what. So what is a prototype? To break it down, a prototype is three things in my mind. It's a question or assumption you have relating to your idea. It's an experience or a physical artifact that you mock up to put in front of people to answer that question or test that assumption. And it's one or more real people to test with, ideally in context. Prototyping is so important because you'll never, ever, ever get true feedback telling people about your great new experience or your great new idea or showing them a slideshow. This is why we must simulate the services we are creating or the parts of the services we're thinking about changing in an experienceable way at an early stage. People, you cannot experience an experience without experiencing it. That's a bit of a mouthful, but it is true. Like they say, a picture paints 1,000 words, a prototype paints a bazillion, jillion, gazillion words. It gets people to experience it. I've got a few real life examples for you of how prototyping has been used to answer a specific question or check if an assumption is being made or the assumption that is being made is in fact true. First one I'm showing you is from Zappos, online shoe retailer. So when Zappos first started out, they knew that there was a pretty massive assumption baked into their idea of an online shoe store. And it was the assumption that people would actually buy shoes online. This assumption was tied entirely to their core value proposition. Like it's what their whole idea was based on, that real people would buy the shoes that they wanted to sell online. That must be true in order for their business or service idea to work. It has to be true. If that's not true, they've got nothing. So they created a web page that had photos of shoes on it, along with a payment function for customers to actually then go ahead and buy those shoes. So when a customer did actually buy something, the founder literally went down to a local shoe shop, bought the shoes that he had taken a photo of and put on his website, packaged them up in his own packaging, and then he posted them himself. They didn't own any inventory. They didn't have a legitimate supply chain. They literally set up a web page with photos of shoes that were available in a shoe shop near them. They were purely testing the genuine customer appetite in one of the cheapest, best, and quickest ways possible. This tactic used by Zappos is commonly used to prototype ideas and test assumptions. And it's called like Wizard of Oz prototypes, because effectively these prototypes look and feel like the real thing, but in fact, they're smoke and mirrors. As a user of that website or a customer of that website, you would have thought you were buying shoes from a company called Zappos. This is a second example, which in a way is similar. It's an example from Shift, and it's a project that we started many years ago and are still working on now, at the time called Family Feeds. There was a specific question that we were interested in, or an assumption, I should say, which is that parents on a low income who already buy takeaway several times a week are interested in buying healthier takeaways instead. This was basically in an effort to see if we could encourage healthier reading within low-income families. And what we did was we set up a series of Facebook ads advertising what we call proper dinners as takeaway, so something that you might make at home yourself. And we basically paid for some Facebook promo ads to promote those ads to parents at dinner time. And if they clicked on it, they would get sent through to a dummy landing page that we had mocked up to see if basically how many parents would click on those ads, and which of those what we were wondering was, is there enough interest there in order to keep going with this idea? This is an example from an airport, so a bit different again. So this was something that went on in Copenhagen Airport by a partner organization of ours a few years ago. They called it the Airport Swap Hub. And they had a question, which was, will travelers donate items that they don't want to carry with them on their travels, essentially with the intended impact of reducing waste, reducing the amount of things that are thrown away because of small carry-on luggage that cannot be brought on the plane. So what they did, first of all, to test their idea, was they set up a drop desk, a sign, and created a flyer, which you can see there in those images, and they plonked it in the airport terminal. And then what they did was they were observing if and how travelers interacted. Were they actually donating the items that they didn't want to carry with them? Another example, one from Shift, a Universal Credit Survival Pack. And I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about this one later. Had the question of, will social housing tenants who have just made a claim for universal credit phone up their social housing landlord to make a rent adjustment to ease basically their outgoings while they're waiting for their first payment and to avoid new debt buildup. So one of the first things we did was we made a printout, which was basically a checklist of information to tell tenants what they were entitled to do and proactive steps that they could take in order to minimize their outgoings and maximize what support was available during that time. And we posted it out to those tenants over a 4-week period. Print out of a piece of paper. Dropbox, another, I guess, more commercial known example. So when Dropbox was getting started, again, they used a purely smoke and mirrors explainer video, that kind of Wizard of Oz technique again, demonstrating what Dropbox would and could do. So they were interested in seeing if potential customers were interested in storing and sharing their files online. So they set up this basically explainer video. I think it's about 3 minutes long or something like that, 4.5 minutes long. That kind of Wizard of Oz style walked through what Dropbox was, even though none of it existed. It was all kind of smoke and mirrors and made up. They posted this video onto popular like online communities, websites, things like Reddit, where their target audience was hanging out. And literally overnight, Dropbox earned itself 60,000 signups. They knew they had something that people wanted just from that video, and then they could go forth and start building something else out. And to finish these examples, this is a bit of a cheat because it's not an actual like real example of a real organization or a real service, but digital prototypes is something that we're all thinking about now as ways of reaching new audience types. Or new service users in remote ways. And I guess I'm putting this here as just an example to show you what digital apps, websites, platforms can look like and how they can be prototyped and tested really simply. One thing we often do at Shift is get a rectangle of foam board or card or even just our own phone and stick post-its on it or stick pieces of paper on it with the information that we think is interesting, and we'll get people to just like touch through it and replace pieces of paper as we go and to emulate that experience of what it would be like to use to use a tactic or to use a website or app or platform like that and get relevant feedback. So in these examples I talked you through, you'll have seen that prototyping is never for prototyping's sake. We make quick, lightweight mock-ups of things to emulate an experience. That is the intention. It has to test an assumption or answer a question, and always ideally testing it with real people. You can test with other people up front if you want, like your colleagues or friends, to get some initial feedback, or even to get comfortable with the idea of showing your work early. But ideally, you'd want to be getting to that point very quickly where you're testing with real customers, service users, beneficiaries, people, communities, whatever you want to call them, ideally in context. 1 second, I need to sneeze. Okay, I'm really glad this is being recorded. So these three components are not only the makeup of what a prototype is, they're also your how-to guide for doing it yourself. So the how-to of prototyping is know what you're testing, test small and test early, and test with real people. You're getting used to the fact that I just repeat things over and over again now. So the first step is knowing what you're testing. So every idea has an assumption that is baked into it, normally more than one assumption, normally many assumptions. And these are things that must be true for the idea to achieve its intended impact. Your tests should be designed to test the biggest or riskiest assumptions. The biggest or riskiest assumptions are normally the ones that you are least confident about. So the ones where you really feel uncertainty, you really feel unsure, you really feel they're risky. Like I said, you know your people, you know that you've got informed ideas, you'll know where an assumption holds weight and is likely to be true, and you'll know when you feel that uncertainty. That's where you need to start. But on this one, think back to the examples I talked you through, like Zappos, who made that assumption that people would buy shoes online, or Dropbox, who made that assumption that people wanted to store or share files online. Those are big assumptions that they knew were baked into their ideas, that they wrote down on a piece of paper and said, this must be true in order for this product service to have the impact that we want it to have. A question for you. So earlier you wrote down an idea that you're thinking about or working on right now to improve your service impact. Now, I want you to write down what the assumptions are that are baked into that idea that you're thinking about or working on. So the things that must be true to achieve the impact that you desire. You don't have to write them all down because there might be those. Write down three. I'm going to give you a minute. I'm going to take a sip of water. All right, you might have three. Once you've written down three assumptions or questions that are baked into your idea, you can either put them in the chat or write them down on your piece of paper. Circle or post in the chat the one that feels riskiest to you, the one you're least confident about. Do that now. Okay. The second step is to test small and test early. So a prototype should be built to test your highest priority assumptions, nothing more. You have to start as small and as lightweight as possible if you're truly bought into the idea of saving money, saving time, saving resource, saving your energy. Avoid all bells, avoid all whistles. They're not needed at this point. The aim is to test and learn quickly, and you must be prepared to change your idea. This is not about getting validation or getting somebody to say great job. This is about getting something out in the lightest, smallest form as much as possible to get real feedback and real observation about what works and what doesn't work. Think back to some of the examples I gave. So like when How We at Shift wanted to know if parents on low income who bought takeaways already a few times a week were interested in buying healthier versions of those takeaways instead. We knew the assumption and we tested small. We created some dummy Facebook ads and tracked how parents would click through to our dummy website. This is stuff that like anybody can make themselves if you have a bit of a familiarity with Facebook and maybe Squarespace, or you'll know somebody who can do it for you. It's not something that you need a designer or a web developer for. We wanted to build confidence in our idea. before investing any more money. And that's why we did. And some of our biggest learnings happened at those early stages when we were testing with really simple Facebook ads that we were changing constantly before we actually went and built that idea any further into, well, what now exists as a real takeaway in South London. I cannot emphasize enough the importance of fidelity. So think about this. If you don't know yet whether people need a wheel at all, go with the lowest possible fidelity to get feedback about the desirability of that concept as a whole. Having confirmed that people do in fact want a wheel, then you can increase the fidelity. What kind of wheel might they want? Should it have spokes? Should it have a tire? How big should it be? What's the context they're going to use it in? Only after going through a few rounds like this to understand the necessary features and attributes should you start moving to a higher fidelity, which is basically testing what it feels like and what it looks like. When a prototype is sufficiently low fidelity, users will feel free to give honest feedback or even take a marker to it and fix certain things right away themselves. This is the kind of participation that you want, and there's nothing better than being able to come back with a second iteration showing what you've changed based on their feedback. This is something that we sometimes do at Shift before we're even ready to make a Facebook ad or make a printout. We'll draw a picture of it, or we'll get, you know, one of our art workers to draw a picture of it, or whoever's good at drawing, and we'll put it in front of the people and we'll say, imagine this situation, it works like this. This is how you would interact with it. This is what it might look like. Here's a marker, tell me what you would change. And that's a really great way to start with what is a simple paper prototype or a drawing and get people to start co-creating that with you to even help you are thinking along from the off. My point here, prototyping at too high a fidelity too early will get you feedback on what it looks like or what it feels like or where a certain button should be, not whether your strategic direction is right, not whether the core proposition within your idea is actually needed and wanted by those service users. The earlier you prototype and test your ideas, the lower the cost of making changes as you learn what isn't working. If you need to convince anybody, yourself or anybody in your organization, that this is worth doing, that it's worth doing low fidelity prototyping, this is the argument that will win them over. Too often we see organizations spending months and tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands building something that once they finally put in front of customers or service users just simply isn't right. It doesn't do the intended job. But if they had tested that concept properly in the early stages, in a fast, cheap, small, lightweight way, they could have pivoted. They could have made it something that was needed and had the impact that was intended without spending that money, without spending that time. You should only increase the fidelity of your prototypes and test as your certainty and your confidence increases. When you're testing the core concept or proposition and whether people actually want it, always start with low fidelity. Asking as your confidence increases, that the assumptions that you're making are actually true, you can increase the fidelity and start looking at how variations in your design or your delivery or the specifics around usability, i.e. the use of that service or the interaction with that service. Number 3, so the third step is to test with real people. Prototyping helps you understand not what people say, but what they actually do. And this is what makes it different from doing more kind of discovery style ethnographic research or user research, which is based on a lot of conversation and asking people what they need or think. People will tell you what they think they need or what they'll think they do. And then you'll know what they say they do, but you'll never actually know what they actually do until you start prototyping and testing with them. When you test in context, you can observe real or very close to real behavior. So again, thinking back to those prototypes with Zappos or Dropbox or our own internal prototypes with our healthy takeaway alternatives that we tested with the social ads. So a question for you again. Go back to the assumption that you circled. The one that you said feels riskiest within the idea that you have in mind that you're thinking about or are already trying out, and quickly jot down 1 or 2 small, light, low fidelity ways you can test this assumption and who you can test it with. You can pop that in the chat or you can write it down on your own piece of paper. Think back to the examples I gave of different types of prototypes. Could you make a quick video? Could you simulate an experience by having a phone call or a WhatsApp conversation? Could you mock up some social ads or a dummy web page? What's the lightest way you can simulate this experience for people to quickly test if that assumption of yours that feels riskiest or that you have least confidence in is true or false? I'm intentionally pausing here. Okay. I'm going to walk you through a case study just to go a little bit deeper on some of this. An idea that I've been working on with some colleagues at Shift. This time last year, we started a new project with One Manchester, who are a social housing provider, a housing association based in Manchester and a partner of ours at Shift for the last few years. Together, following a bit of an immersive research phase with their tenants, we created a brief to prototype and test ways to support tenants through the 5-week wait, which is basically that 5 weeks between claiming universal credit and receiving your first payment. This 5-week wait is often the minimum period. If anything goes wrong, it can be longer. As I talk through this case study, keep an eye out for these three things. Thank you, Amelia. I'm keeping an eye on the chat at the same time, and we can cover all these questions at the end as well. We'll leave about 10 to 15 minutes. So as I talk through this case study, keep an eye out for these 3 things. So the assumptions or questions we're testing, how we tested small and early, and how we tested with real people. We knew from our initial research with One Manchester's tenants who had just moved on to universal credit that the 5-week wait was until the first payment is where debt can build rapidly for most people, whether that be from taking loans to cover costs or missing payments of rent and bills because of no or low income. And even though there is service provision available to support people during that 5-week wait, tenants don't always know that support's there, or sometimes they know it's there and don't trust it. We had a grounding insight, which was that the wait until the first universal credit payment is when debt can build rapidly for tenants. We know and we knew that there is support available, like payment breaks on rent and bills. There's, emergency food supplies, emergency energy supplies, counselling support, but tenants don't always know that support's there. And this led us to our impact hypothesis, which was that a universal credit survival pack, I should say, as we called it, would enable tenants to take proactive control to manage changes when they move on to universal credit, minimizing new debt build up and building awareness of the support that's available to them. This was our question. What if we developed this UC survival pack and delivered it to tenants as soon as we got notified? I say we, I mean One Manchester. As soon as One Manchester got notified about their tenant's claim, and it would include everything that they need to make the wait time easier all in one place. A promise to pause or adjust rent, a checklist of payment breaks that are available to all of their tenants from utility providers, vouchers for emergency basics from the supermarket or local community shops, and free money and debt and benefits advice as well. There were many assumptions baked into this idea. The ones that we believe must be true for this idea to achieve its intended impact of minimizing debt buildup during that 5-week wait were that tenants would open their UC survival pack. We were going to track usage of the supermarket vouchers included in the pack as a proxy for open rates. Tenants would engage with One Manchester. We were going to track the number of calls to the phone number on the pack, as well as the number of tenants who opted to make a rent adjustment or take a rent break as well. And then we also kept an eye on, I guess, what you'd call the kind of more general money, debt and benefits advice, which we tracked through the number of tenants who accepted the offer of debt advice from One Manchester's in-house debt and benefits advice team. And with these assumptions prioritised and agreed, we prototyped the UC survival pack. It included, it was so simple, it was a £10 supermarket voucher for the nearest Tesco or Asda, information about hyperlocal support services that offer emergency basics like food banks, libraries, counselling, and a call to action to reach out to Manchester for an immediate rent adjustment if needed, as well as that kind of longer term advice and support. This prototype was not high tech. It was a printout, an envelope. You can see it here. That's me, that's my name, that's the shift address. An envelope with a sticker on it and a sticker on the back, a printout, a voucher. You can see the call to action there with basically the big phone number, which was the main thing to encourage them to contact the UC phone line and make that rent adjustment. And that leaflet inside with the 3 steps that they could take, proactive steps that they can take to minimize outgoing and maximize on the support that was available to them. The most time consuming part of making this prototype was actually just writing that copy that's on that checklist and on that envelope in a way that felt personal and hyperlocal to people. The other bits were literally mocked up on the computer, printed out using a normal A4 printer, and folded up. We printed and packed 60 of these, which was about how many tenants One Manchester expected to make a new claim for universal credit over a 4-week period. And then we would send a pack to every single one of those people. The test was integrated into One Manchester's standard universal credit first response system. So it wasn't like a brand new thing. It was kind of like an adjustment of something that they already do. What they normally would have done would be a phone call from the rents team, calling the tenants, say, hey, we've got a notification that you're claiming universal credit and we just want to check in on how you're managing with your rent and if there's anything that we can do to help you until you get your first payment. But many tenants didn't answer that phone call. And that was one of the driving reasons for trying this as well. And that makes sense because if they've just lost their job or had a change of circumstance, have claimed universal credit, they're probably worrying about paying their rent and they might not want to pick up the phone to their housing provider. So the pack was sent after a first attempt to call the tenants was made by the rents team to both tenants who answered the calls and didn't. And over the 4-week test period, we posted 57 packs to tenants who made a new claim, along with a text to let them know that the pack was on the way. And here's what we kept track of, the open rate as an indicator of voucher usage. So we kept a record of all the voucher numbers, and then we checked whether they had been used or not. And then that's how we knew whether the pack had been opened. The number of calls to the universal credit line. So there was one person manning that phone who would pick up and organise a rent adjustment if tenants wanted it. And the number of engagements with One Money, which is One Manchester's internal money and debt advice team. So how many of them were engaging with or accepting the offer of the debt or benefits advice that was offered to them. And this is just a massive spreadsheet. This is all we did for 5 weeks. And when I say all we did, it was like a couple of hours a day, just keeping track of basically who made a claim, posting the pack to them, adding it to the spreadsheet, and then checking whether vouchers had been used or whether a call had been received, and everything would just go into this Google sheet. And that was it. Again, not high tech, very low tech, just a Google sheet. What we saw was that 37% of tenants who normally answered their first call from the rents team, what am I trying to say here? So basically over the period of the test, the number of tenants who engaged with One Manchester, i.e. who kind of answered that first phone call, increased from what was about 37% engagement to 79% engagement. That was based on the 57 people who opened the pack. So this included tenants who already answered the standard phone call, but then also the tenants who phoned the number on the pack, or phoned or picked up a follow-on call from the rents team. So a huge increase in engagement. And over the period of the test, 37 out of 57 of those tenants basically requested and agreed a rent adjustment or a rent break to be made, which was 65% of all tenants who received the pack, which was an increase from the normal amount, which was 25. So we were starting to get a bit of confidence that, okay, yes, this is going to encourage people to engage with us, and it's going to encourage people to take a rent break. Most tenants who did engage, however, had good rent accounts, which basically meant that those who had high arrears or erratic payments didn't really engage despite the promise of a free voucher. And only 42% of tenants used their vouchers. So because we were taking that as proxy for the number of people who opened their packs, that told us that more than half didn't even open their pack. And the team at One Manchester suggested that this may be due to a fear or worry of engaging with their landlord while behind on rent. So that leads us to think, okay, well, what could we do next? Next, we'll test things like sending packs in partnership with a trusted local organisation, or to adjust the messaging to emphasise that the kind of main objective is for One Manchester to support them through their tenancy. So we were interested in testing an unbranded pack that didn't have One Manchester's logo on it, testing via more channels. So instead of letters that people might not open, maybe going out by email, home visits, or WhatsApp even, and even just focusing on the one tenant segment only at a time. So those in high arrears, or those at risk of high financial vulnerability as well. This brings me to my last point, which is be prepared to change your idea. Like we're like, we know there's things we're going to have to change, that's okay, and we're not going to be precious about it. You're going to get things wrong, and that's the benefit of low fidelity testing and early prototyping, to figure out which of the assumptions baked into your idea are true and which are not, before spending lots of time, money, and energy. So be prepared to change your idea. A few points that I'll leave you with before we wrap up. Remember, a prototype is not a pitch. Don't try and sell or explain your idea or your concept, but let people experience it and invite feedback. That's the purpose here. You want to find out if the assumptions baked into your idea that must be true in order for the idea or concept or service to be successful are in fact true or not. So continue isolating your assumptions and test one at a time. It makes it much more manageable and less scary. This will help you decide whether to continue or pivot before investing too heavily. Prototyping is just one of a series of techniques for understanding whether or not your product or service is on the right track. So between prototyping, piloting, and MVP, each is equally important, but has to come in the right order so we can establish desirability, feasibility, and viability in a logical order. Similarly, quantitative research is important and has its place, but it doesn't really make much sense before this kind of qualitative testing component is done, to basically help understand what it even is that we're trying to learn and whether our assumptions are true in the first place. Lo-fi prototyping takes courage. It's difficult to show something rough and ready to a colleague, or especially a person who uses your services. So be brave. And that's it. Open to taking questions now. I think Amelia is going to jump back in.
Thanks, Louise. That was really helpful, really kind of like easy to understand, and great to have the provocations as we went through. I think you've probably seen there's been a question. We've been talking quite a lot about testing motivation in the chat, and there's been a kind of question that's come up about how would you test motivation, because as you kind of said, what someone says might not always be what they do. So asking questions about that isn't going to work in a way. So an example, I guess, is thinking about helping mental health first aiders kind of want to learn more and utilize their knowledge better. So like ways for them to engage with sharing that knowledge. How would we test that motivation?
Okay, that's an interesting question. Motivation is a bit of a fuzzy word for me. So I'd probably try and get really specific on that and say, what is my question? Like, what is the kind of assumption baked into that? So if you were to use the example of, did you say encouraging mental health first aiders to share their knowledge?
Yeah, so working with mental health first aiders to help them to kind of work better in certain estates, for example, with a housing organisation, and then thinking about how to form maybe a group of them to quarterly kind of work together, have refreshers, organise their approach so they're kind of peer supporting each other in a way. But there's a massive assumption there about their motivation to improve the practice or to learn more from each other.
Yeah. So that's like a pretty broad topic, and one that you could get easily lost in. So I'd say try and break it down and be really specific. So kind of like we did, write down what the idea is. So if I was to just to kind of like take one idea from that, I would say that mental health first aid workers want to get together on a monthly basis. And share their learnings with each other to forward their own learning. So that's like an idea that I have, that they'll want to get together on a monthly basis. I'm making the assumption that monthly is the right time that they want to talk to other mental health first aiders, and that they feel that they've got something valuable to share. So I would test one of those at a time, and I would probably say mental health first aiders, I'm assuming that they want to meet monthly. And then I would probably try and do something really simple, like write down all of the mental health first aiders I know in my community, and I would probably send them a text invite or something like that and say, monthly meetup coming up on the 7th of December. Do you want to come? And see how many people show up on that day, and then go from there.
Great, thank you for breaking that down. So basically kind of going below that layer of motivation and thinking about the individual components.
Yeah, typically I always think it's best to focus on behavior rather than motivation. You can start to understand people's motivations from doing more open inquiry research. And like I said, you probably have a good hunch on what people's motivations are. So prototyping can really help you test what people actually do and how they actually behave.
And so then I guess a bit of a follow-on question for that, in this time when everything is on a computer, if you can't physically, say if it's a physical product, but you can't be with people, what would be good ways to kind of do remote testing of products or services?
Yeah, so I think there's many ways. I think like if you're talking about digital prototypes, like there's some really good free quite easy to use tools. If you're like comfortable enough with like tech but not having to be in any way a developer, there are tools you can use, like Envision is one that I always use, and I have it on my phone right now. Envision and yeah, I'm not going to give you a list. Envision is the one to start with, where you can go and you don't even have to mock up like wireframes or user interface designs. You can literally draw something out on a piece of paper, and you can draw several screens out on a piece of paper and take photographs of them, literally in a flow, add hotspots, and then it generates a link for you, which you can send to people you want to walk through your idea, and then literally phone them and say, have you got my link? Open it up now, walk through it, and tell me what you think. And do you have any feedback? Obviously, that's more of a kind of like conversational type thing, like starting with what essentially is a paper prototype, but photographed and turned into what looks like a physical prototype. But obviously then there's those remote examples like setting up ads and stuff as well. But I think my number one piece of advice on this is like, use what's available to you and don't try and think that anything has to be fancy or snazzy. So if you've got your phone, use your phone. If you've got an email account, use an email account. If you've got Facebook and you have £100 to spend on some ads to test your idea, then do that. Use whatever's available to you.
And it's not quite a question on prototyping, but there was just a question from Matt about whether or not One Manchester is still using the pack that you shared with us. There's a lot of love for that really practical example.
Oh yeah, I love that pack. So interestingly, we just finished testing that pack just at the start of COVID. So we got a whole bunch of insights data for that. Unfortunately, at the time, One Manchester had to quickly switch to kind of firefighting everything that was happening with COVID-19, but we're hoping to continue testing that soon, especially as over the next few years, people will fully transition onto universal credit from the kind of legacy benefit system.
Time. If there's any more questions, we've probably got like another 2 minutes. If you want to pop them in the chat or in the Q&A function, they'd be really welcome. Actually, Louise, I had a bit of a question. So you spoke about kind of smaller tactics. So rather than testing a big idea, testing kind of like a tactic when you kind of go with provocation. Would you be able to give us an example of like a tactic that you might want to test?
Say that again, Amelia.
So one of the things you asked in a provocation was about testing, like if it's just a tactic that people want to test rather than a whole big idea for a whole new service or a whole new product.
Okay, so if they didn't want to test a whole new product or service, but they might want to test something like one thing that we've been talking to some of, so I'm working on the financial well-being strand of Beyond, and one thing that we've been talking to some of our organizations about is different channels to use. So that's where it's like, I don't want to change my service or build a new service, but I'm afraid that I'm not reaching as many people as I could be reaching, or I'm afraid that people are being excluded from my service delivery. So what can I do about that? So I would say a tactic might be, well, we know that we're working with a lot of young adults or people who experience mental health issues, who might be much more familiar with interacting via text, i.e. WhatsApp, rather than on the phone, because you know, people find talking on the phone like anxiety provoking these days. So let's actually just put a WhatsApp number on our website now and say that this is an option, and see how many people text. That for me is an example of kind of like testing a different tactic or channel within what your existing service delivery is, just to see if you could answer the question of, will WhatsApp help me reach more people, for example?
Yeah, so it can even be testing kind of a small tweak rather than a whole big idea.
Exactly.
There's one more question, I'm going to squeeze it in before we finish. So Catherine's asked if there's a negative reputational impact from producing like a Wizard of Oz prototype, so I guess like the Dropbox example that you shared, that leads to a dummy page.
This is a really good question, and this is something that our partners worry about a lot of the time when we say we're just going to set up a dummy page and we'll send people there and everything will be fine, and they're like, but what happens if they go there and they really want that thing that we're offering, and then we say we can't give it to them? I always think it's in about how you frame things. So for example, when we were doing the family feeds prototype and we set up the social ads linking to our dummy website, and we were working with a local council at the time who was helping us with some funding for that, and they were a little bit worried about this. But what we ended up doing is basically setting up the ads, sending them to the website, and then once they basically landed there by selecting what they wanted, we'd basically just be really honest with them and say, this is what we're doing. We're interested in creating a healthier takeaway for parents in this area. And we've set up this test to see how many people would be interested in it. We're really sorry that it's not available yet, but if you really want it, we're going to make it for you. So please sign up your email here and express your interest in this service. And even better, if you want to help us co-design it or co-develop it, let us know. And then we might get back in touch with you when we go further along or when we do a soft launch.
So you can still test the behavior, but you get to be honest and start actually a conversation with people who'd be your users in a way later on.
That's it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Louise. There's loads of people in the chat and they're going to revisit the presentation later and give a bit more thought. So I feel like it's really resonated. And thank you all for joining us today. We've got absolutely loads happening on the Beyond programme for the rest of the week. So if you're feeling inspired and you want to get involved, this afternoon for financial wellbeing and Thursday for early years, we've got a relationship-centered design workshop, which is all about putting relationships at the heart of your services, and particularly applicable at the moment where people are trying to work out how to make relationships work online, for example. We also have a panel discussion tomorrow, which we're super excited about, for the financial wellbeing strand, which is working with some of the organisations at the forefront of financial wellbeing in the UK and talking to them about how they've adapted to and responded to COVID-19 and ongoing crisis and what their kind of next steps are. And the last thing that I really want to flag is that there's some funding opportunities from our partner Catalyst and the National Lottery Community Fund for the Sector Challenge programme. They're closing on Friday, and they're grants for up to £10,000 for English organisations working in early years and financial wellbeing, as well as a couple of other areas, to work collectively on some of the challenges that have been emerging on this programme as we've been talking to on the kind of Beyond programmes, and particularly in the Discovery chat. So check it out. I'll pop a link in the chat, and you'll see that you can access that also on our website. And have a great day, everyone. Thank you. Bye.